Hi everyone. This is called Next of Kin and it's from Spain. The old man longed for children, but his young wife had none, so he invited his nephew to live with them. This infuriated his wife, who had a vile temper. When her husband welcomed the young man with great affection, she turned pale with jealousy. Her eyes narrowed and her head flattened. Her head flattened? Why? And when she licked her lips, her nephew saw that her tongue was forked. From that day on, the young man spent as much time as possible with his uncle and tried to avoid his aunt. But she seemed to enjoy startling him, suddenly appearing when he least expected her. One evening, the nephew returned to the house quite late. He lit a candle and started up the stairs. Halfway up, he tripped over what seemed to be a coiled rope. Imagine his horror when that rope uncoiled and slithered up the steps in front of him. Then he saw it glide across the hall and under the door of his uncle's bedroom. "Wake up! Wake up!" the young man shouted, and he knocked on the door until his knuckles hurt. But his sleepy uncle let him in the bedroom. But when his sleepy uncle let him in the bedroom, there was no snake in sight. His aunt seemed to be sleeping, so the young man whispered in his uncle's ear, "I saw a snake." But his uncle was too groggy to respond, and he slid back under the covers. Then the young man searched the room quietly, looking into drawers and cupboards and corners. He peered under the bed and behind chairs. He was beginning to think he was going mad when suddenly his aunt sat up in bed, narrowing her eyes, and gave him an evil look. That made his flesh creep. "I'm sorry to bother you," he cried, and raced into his bedroom and firmly shut the door. When he awoke the next morning, he noticed that the bottom of his bedroom door was arched up in the center, leaving just enough space for a snake to slither through. He rolled out of bed, trembling. When he went downstairs, he was shocked to see that every door in the house had a snake-sized arch beneath it. His aunt was sitting at the table eating. "Your uncle left for the day," she said, licking her lips with her forked tongue. Then the young man was too terrified to speak, but his silence only made matters worse. "I don't like the way you treat me," she said, and grabbed his arm. Then she pressed her fingernails so deeply into his skin that he felt as if he were being bitten. He rushed outdoors and saw that his arm was swelling. His hands and fingers were beginning to throb. He knew he must seek help, so he ran into the forest and found the wise old hermit who lived there. The old man examined him carefully, then handed him some leaves. "These are best for snake bite," he said. "Bind them around your arm and keep them wet." "But I wasn't bitten by a snake," said the young man. "Those marks were made by my aunt's fingernails." The old hermit shook his head in despair. "The touch of a snake woman is even worse," he said. "But try these leaves. They should help." The young man was appalled. "Is my aunt really a snake woman?" he asked. "If you want to find out," the hermit replied, "stay awake tonight and wait until she enters your room, then cut off the tip of her tail." The young man wasn't sure how that would help, but he thanked the hermit for his advice and returned to his uncle's house. By afternoon, he was happy to see that the wet leaves had reduced the swelling. He watched his aunt closely that evening, but he didn't notice anything strange until she tasted her soup. She said it needed to be seasoned but more, and lingered on the S as if she were hissing. Her nephew felt goosebumps rise from the tips of his toes to the top of his head. He excused himself from the table and went up to his bedroom, but not to sleep. He planned to watch for the snake all night long. There was enough moonlight for him to see the bottom of his door, so he brought out a candle and unsheathed his sword. Then he stood waiting. He watched for hours for the snake and wondering what she might do. What if it slithered through the window instead, crept up behind him and struck him with its venomous fangs? What if it slithered to the top of the window ledge and dropped down on him from above? He was thinking of fleeing for his life when he finally saw the snake glide under the door, First its head, then its body, then its tail. Slash! He slung his sword so quickly that the snake had no warning, and the tip of its tail began writhing all by itself on the floor. The snake raised his head as if to strike, but then it hissed viciously and slithered out of the room. When he looked down the hall, he saw it disappear under his uncle's door. The young man couldn't stand looking at the quivering tail, so he scooped it up on his sword and flung it into a drawer. He hardly slept all that night, and when he did, snakes haunted him in his dreams. The next morning, he opened the drawer a crack to look at the snake's tail, and was amazed to see that it had turned into human toes. He raced back to the forest to tell the hermit what had happened. "And now my aunt is staying in bed, but do you know what? My uncle